Funding for this video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you. What's up, punks? Welcome to video. I have a chair. This chair does not fit in this apartment, but I did not get this chair for this apartment. Spoilers. Anyway, it's the first Sunday of the month, and you know what that means. We're gonna discuss everything that I read last month. This is the stack we're dealing with. I'm very excited. It was a pretty good reading month. January tends to be flat reading-wise, but we really branched out, and I'm stoked on it. Once again, I did my best according to the insides of my books. None of these are published by HarperCollins.
Aside from our book club book, which was decided months and months and months ago before the strike began, I have to speak about it because it's our book club, but if you'd like your own copy, I will link down below a resource where you can do so and support the union. So win-win.
Because if you didn't know, as of the day that I'm filming this, the union of this major publishing house is still on strike after over 50 days of being on strike. I think that everyone deserves a livable wage, so I will leave some links and some resources down below. And of course, before we dive into the 12/13 books, depending on how you count, you already know we got to go through our 3 disclaimers real quick. 1, do not compare yourself to anyone but you, especially when it comes to reading. As long as you're reading, you're winning. 2, if I loved a book that you hated or I hated a book that you loved, that is a-okay. Having a different reaction to ink on paper is not only normal, but encouraged. We all look for different things when picking up a book, and that is celebrated here in this house. And 3, please check any all content warnings before picking up any of these books. If you have any sensitivities, there's no shame in that. Take care of yourself. And without further ado, let's talk about books, baby. Now, I've been in a reading slump, and my slump might look different than your slump. Please refer to disclaimer number 1. For me, a slump isn't just when I'm not reading as much as I usually do, but it's when I want to be reading in theory, but just can't seem to get myself to do so despite my best efforts. I know that this will improve once the spring has sprung and we break through the consistent dark gray that the winter brings, but I'm not in spring right now. I'm in the present moment, and I'm really just trying to work with what I have here. So to break the slump, I've been mood reading even more so than usual, and I dance around all of the genres to keep things spicy. So while we go over all these books, I'd like to talk about why certain genres can really help you if you're slumping. Let's do it! The first category we're going to be discussing is just general fiction. You know how it is. Everything literary, all things contemporary with a sprinkle of young adult. The first book that I read was The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Now, this was our Pocket Pages book club book for the month of January. The Pocket Pages is the book club for this channel. It's $1 a month. We read something new within the first 3 weeks of every month, discuss in a temporary discourse over it in the last week of every month. So there's no way to miss out. You don't have to be available for any live streams. Join us if you'd like. It's a great community. So what we read last month is a historical fiction, and the back of my book says that it's a story about 2 7-year-old twins growing up in Kerala, India. And I scooped this one up specifically because I thought that it would be a great way to learn about the rich and complex history of this country through the accessible lens of children. However, and this is my biggest complaint really, I don't think that the back of this book paints an accurate picture for what you will be reading about. It was still a strong read, but it was extremely complex, non-linear, several perspectives that a lot of us struggled keeping up with, myself included. We did do our best though. There were a lot of videos shared in the Discord with synopsis, breakdowns, theme analysis, and historical background, which was so great. I'm so glad we read this together. But because of all those characters and because of the non-linear timeline and just the writing style in general, which was beautiful, we all agreed on that, it did feel a little muddled and disjointed and overall extremely difficult to follow. But what this book was extremely rich with metaphor and information, and I think because of that, it never really played the movie in my head. It never fell into the story. It was more so me analyzing the words, which I can definitely appreciate because it was so beautifully written. Roy's artistic craft with words on paper is undeniably extraordinary. And I'd also like to emphasize that just because a book requires you to put your thinking cap on, that doesn't necessarily make it a bad book, at least in my opinion. I think this book did a wonderful job on commenting on the many arbitrary hierarchies that humans place on their fellow man. But my 2 personal favorite themes were showing how humans can get used to the most inexplicable situations, and also how things can completely change within the span of one day. So despite struggling a little bit to follow this one, I was nonetheless swept up in its poetic prose, and I'm very thankful we read it together because I wouldn't have been able to do it alone. Next, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. This dual POV follows 2 unnamed characters who fall in love in Cairo, Egypt, but shares with us so much more than just a love story. Naga challenges structure, story, and our minds with immaculately lyrical lines and powerful prose. My experience here from front to back swam alongside heartbreaking trauma, moral ambiguity, complex themes, and breathtaking moments. The juxtaposition between grimier scenes and its lyrical lines just made me stop in my tracks. It really provided such an emotional clash for me. And also the juxtaposition of where our 2 characters are at. They're very different perspectives. It was just all very thought-provoking. I loved the concepts surrounding the quote-unquote punishing aesthetics of being poor, the question of who gets power and who gets sympathy was so gorgeously and painfully explored. I could go on. There were so many themes that, in my opinion, were done so well. Otherness, the shadow of judgment that the privilege casts upon those they take pity on yet despise. Even just the simple theme of how to experience another person's story and respect their perspective was profound to me. There's a twist, so to say, in the third part of the book that we cannot discuss without spoiling the entire thing. But within it, there's a line that goes, "We are here to listen and bear witness." And that's what I tried to keep in mind when reading and reviewing this book, because I did see several people online really dislike this one because they didn't appreciate how the author painted Egypt as a country. And I can totally see why. There were a lot of moments where one of our protagonists had a pretty gross perspective on where they were and the people around them, but I also felt like this was an intentional choice, maybe to show how disconnected and subconsciously superior the American Egyptian felt. I don't know, I'm not the author, but to me these raw and honest peeks into the characters' thoughts and minds humanized them and made them feel flawed like we all are. It revealed the ignorance that one may possess when entering a new place without even realizing that they're holding it. I could be horrendously wrong, but that's just the vibe that I got. I was just so impressed with this one. Noranaga is so talented. I cannot wait to read anything else that is put out by them. This book is fruit cut into fourths, the belonging and not belonging, golden hour through wooden window panes, the comfort that resides in the sea of unsafe, pomegranate seeds, and dusty roads splattered with water for good reason. I'll be thinking about this one for a long time. Next, the sequel to Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe. So this magical realism sequel expands our experience within this cafe that allows their patrons to go back in time and relive a small moment that took place within the confines of this coffee shop, but the only catch is that they have to get back before the coffee gets cold. The first in this trilogy was the second book ever in my entire life to make me cry, and I read a lot. It just said so much about the many ways that human beings can connect and love each other, and it celebrated that love. It was just... I do agree with a lot of folks that the second one isn't quite as good as the first one, but I still very much enjoyed my time here. This one offered so much more in terms of understanding just a lot of backstory to this lore, which answers a lot of the questions that you may have had from reading the first one, which is what a sequel's here to do, I would say. But what made this book worth reading to me was that the theme was different, but I think equally as good as its first book. And Before the Coffee Gets Cold 1, the theme was we cannot change the past, and that's okay. And in here we explore the idea that we all deserve happiness even if tragedy has befallen us. And in fact, it's a disservice to whomever or whatever we loved and lost to mourn them forever. I can't wait to start the third one, but I'm honestly a little nervous because I don't want my time here to end. I just think that this series is so special and creative and most importantly cozy. If you like slower, sweet stories and somehow you haven't read this extremely popular book, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you jump on the bandwagon and read them. And the last general fiction that I read was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. So this is a story about our protagonist named Aza. Let me know how you pronounce it. She's a high schooler with OCD, and we follow what unfolds when a rich father of an old friend goes missing. So she and her current best friend Daisy embark on some antics together to get some small town answers. Like all John Green books, this one had such strong characters with a playful, slow, yet semi-high stakes story, and dips its toes into some deeper waters while still being filtered through a lighter YA lens. And I feel like this provided just such a safe reading environment where you're able to access deep emotions and still feel comfortable because you're remaining guarded on all sides by this light humor throughout. Truth be told, my only issue with this one was that I just didn't care about this rich guy on the run, and so following Aza and Daisy piece together these clues was the least interesting part of the story for me. However, I still absolutely adored my time here because 1, John Green is undeniably a talented writer, and 2, there is so much more to this story than this missing man. It said so much about belonging, friendship, mental health, grief, and finding happiness in ruin, all while having excellent OCD representation throughout. Most importantly, and my personal favorite part, was that I was so happy to be swept up in this nostalgia as an almost 30-year-old person, still feeling comforted, understood, and ultimately less alone while reading a YA John Green book like I was 15 again. And I think a part of why I put this off for so long was that I was afraid that I was too old and that I wouldn't be able to access that feeling, you know, that it wouldn't be the same. But I was wrong. wrong, and damn do I love being wrong. Now, sometimes when you're in a reading slump, the part that is difficult is creating characters and an entire world in your brain. So sometimes I like to just sit down and read the facts, pick up some nonfiction, do some cold, hard learning. So in January, I read 2 nonfictions, the first one being The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I'm sure you know a lot of my feelings regarding this one. It made its way into a reading vlog. This was for my personal book club that I have with a couple of friends from back home. This one is a short spiritual self-help book that is based in Toltec wisdom. And it's one of the most popular books of forever and all time. It's a bestseller. And I get why. It's readable, it's digestible, the agreements were simple, but also useful. It's good to be reminded of these things in order to keep them in your practice. I agree to the agreements, but the agreements are not my grievances with this book. My issues included the idea that you could manifest disability and sickness to people or away just with your mind. Absolutely not. Incorrect. Wrong. I also just couldn't jibe with the hyper individualism that this book encourages. It's short and simple, like I said. It is its strength, but it's also its weakness. We're not taking into account any socio-political, economic reasons why one wouldn't be able to quote unquote do their best always. And it's never once mentioned the power of community to be your best self. I feel like we absolutely require one another to advance, evolve, and improve ourselves. I don't think you can be the best you alone. That's just my opinion, I guess. I just feel like we require one another, and I think that's a great thing. And so the flavor of this just seemed a little bit out of touch. But the most out of touch part was that he said that Hitler grew very strong and beautifully achieved mass destruction. So yeah, I think he had some good points. The agreements are fine. And there were also some really powerful moments as well. Of course, there's a moment that everyone in the book club underlined, dog-eared, tabbed. You were born with the right to be happy. You were born with the right to love, to enjoy, and to share your love. You don't need knowledge or great philosophical concepts. You don't need the acceptance of others. You express your own divinity by being alive and by loving yourself and others. But despite that moment, at the end of the day, I can't recommend this one fully. I'm just holding on to the belief that there are books that have powerful moments, much like the one we just read, without the concerning comments regarding disability and Nazis. So that being said, please leave your recommendations down below. I'd love to know which self-help books, psychology books, spiritual books changed your life, or at least your perspective. Like, is The Power of Now really as good as everyone says? I'd love to know. Next, Bodywork by Melissa Febos. This one is part how-to, part memoir on how to navigate your own personal narratives. The first chapter, in my opinion, was so empowering, and throughout it did remain helpful and insightful. It is definitely more personal essay slash memoir heavy than it is a how-to book, which has its own strengths, but to me personally, it was way too sex heavy. About half of this book is how to write a sex scene. Actually, yeah, mathematically, almost half of this book is that, which is fine. That's just not what I was looking for. But I did love how powerful she makes the reader feel, especially regarding the traumas and injustices that we face. For example, social justice has always depended upon the testimonies of the oppressed. The listeners must join them, and for that, we need to hear their voices. And we are writing the history that we could not find in any other book. We are telling the stories that no one else can tell, and we are giving this proof of our survival to each other. So good. So despite not necessarily meeting the mark that I arbitrarily set for it, it did instill a newfound confidence in me. So if this one has piqued your interest, I don't think that you have anything to lose in giving it a shot. Okay, my biggest and bestest tip for breaking a reading slump is to DNF those books that are not doing it for you. DNF means did not finish, and you could either hard DNF a book, meaning there's no way in hell I'm picking this book back up, or you can soft DNF it, meaning you put it back on your TBR shelf and you accept that it's the right book, just not the right time. And in the month of January, I medium DNF'd a book, and that book was Stormfire by Christine Monson. Now, in September, I found 3 books, all with similar little covers like this at a thrift store in Wisconsin. And I announced to you all that, picture this, you click on youtube.com to find a video titled, I read 50 Cent Smut, that I found in a Wisconsin thrift store. Stay tuned. And I really fully intended on doing so. I discovered that these are called clinch covers. I devoured, took extensive notes on this like hour-long lecture I found about the history of these books. I just thought it would be silly. I thought it would be a silly little video. But you know what's not silly? The amount of violence against women in these books. I was semi-prepared. It was in the lecture. But oh my gosh, this was unmatched. It was awful. By page 10, our female protagonist is kidnapped. And before the second chapter even comes to a close, there is a multi-page, extensively graphic sexual assault scene. And the man says sends bloody cum rags to her father just to paint a repulsive picture for you. Needless to say, this was putting me in a reading slump. I read about 200 pages and put it down, and I kept telling myself that I'd pick it back up and just never did. And I think for my own mental well-being, it's gonna stay like that for a while. I find it interesting, for lack of a better word, that I haven't read a lot of the popular smut books, you know, ACOTAR for example, but I have seen a lot of the critiques for those books online. And what's interesting to me is the many parallels that we see between clinch cover books and what's popular today. We've barely made a leap nor a bound. So I feel like a lot could be dissected and explored. It could be so cool to read the clinch covers, the Sarah J Maas, and put the pieces together, Pepe Sylvia style.
Pepe Sylvia, I look in the mail. Well, this whole box is Pepe Sylvia!
But that might just have to happen maybe when the sun returns alongside my serotonin, that it's held hostage. Maybe then I'll be able to revisit this project, but I hold no promises because yikes. All I can say is yikes. On a lighter note, in January I read 2 graphic novels, which is my personal favorite way to break a reading slump. If your brain isn't feeling as imaginative as it usually is, or you're just overwhelmed by facing all those words on a page, treat your eyes to some gorgeous art. Enjoy a story without the stress. The first graphic novel I read last month was Bug Boys Outside and Beyond by Laura Netzker, otherwise known as Bug Boys 2. This is the second of the 3 books in the Bug Boys trilogy. All 3 follow 2 bug friends, Dag Bee and Rhino Bee, as they embark on whimsical escapades. The back said, little bugs, big feelings. These best friends are ready for new adventures. Meeting a bat, they're on it. Getting lost in a labyrinth might be scary. I feel like my entire review can be summed up and sell you immediately in 9 words. Adventure Time had a baby with Frog and Toad. I'm never gonna stop saying it because that's the vibe here. It celebrates mundanity like a Frog and Toad book, but has the silly expedition that you see in Adventure Time, but with the best friendship that's featured in both. Reading these feels like being a little kid and watching Saturday morning cartoons. It's over sugary cereal. It's pretending there's a castle in your backyard. That kind of feeling. It's slow, it's safe, it's cute, it's comforting, but it's also hilarious. I'm obsessed with this series. I have the 3rd one and I can't wait to read it. If you are looking to nurture your inner child, you need to read these. And also, if you have a literal child, it is the law. You need to read these to them. These are top tier graphic novels in my opinion. Definitely some of my absolute favorites in the genre. And the next graphic novel I read was Mamo by Sauce Millage. This story follows Jo Manuel as she approaches the village witch, Orla O'Reilly, to help with the many issues that have befallen their town, including her sick mother. The 2 of them discover that when Orla's grandmother died, her bones were scattered across this gorgeous waterfront forest village place, and that is why so much chaos has unfolded. So these newfound friends join forces to find the bones and restore peace to the land. The art and color palette of this one is so impressive to me. This kind of style just really sweeps you up and allows you to fall into the story. You are completely transported. It was paced well, it was light, but still dabbled in some serious stuff. If you love small town witchy adventures, magic, talking to animals, and breaking curses, here's your book. Plus it's a little gay, so you can't lose. However, I do get that graphic novels are not for everybody. So my other go-to hack in breaking reading slumps is to read a thriller, because if you find one that hooks you, they are so quickly paced and you will become so engulfed in the story that you'll only care about getting your questions answered and finding out what happens next, that you'll fly through it with minimal effort required. One of the thrillers I read last month was The Wives by Taryn Fisher. 1-word review, boring. 2-word review, snooze fest. It follows a woman whose husband is a polygamist, and I use air quotes because this is not how polygamy is done. I'll just say that. I can't say a lot because it'll completely spoil the book, but the point is that he has 3 wives and our protagonist has never met the other 2. Really? Please hold. Anyway, as I was saying, the twist at the midway point did pique my interest ever so slightly. But that twist did not take place until over halfway through the book, and it was just a little too late, a little too wrong. I have heard that a lot of people did get a kick out of this one, so if you do like domestic thrillers, which I usually do, if you love an unreliable narrator, which I usually do, but most importantly, if you love a dash of drama, which I usually do, perhaps this could be a fun book to get you out of a slump. I did read it in one day, kind of just because I wanted to get it over with, but I am kind of glad I didn't DNF it because it did get a little bit better, but I just wasn't terribly impressed. But it was a fine way to spend an afternoon, I guess. But if you want to talk about a thriller that will have you hooked from start to finish and will effortlessly play the movie in your head, at least that's what it did for me, look no further than No Exit by Taylor Adams. Okay, so this is about a college girl who is on her way to visit her dying mother, but she gets stuck at a rest stop due to an overwhelming snowstorm. The radio urges everyone there to stay put until morning, so all of the characters, 2 older people and 2 younger dudes, and our protagonist, to stay put for the next 8 or so hours. And so she goes outside to see if she can get some phone signal, you know, update her family on where she's at, what the plan is, and she she sees that there is a child, a kidnapped child, locked in a cage of one of the cars parked at this rest stop. Now what? She can't call the police because there's no phone signal. She can't save the girl because where the heck are they gonna drive to? The roads are undrivable. She doesn't even know whose car it is. What do you do? What do you do? Ooh, it is so good. I buddy read this one with Sarah and we were both screaming at the twists and turns. I was so invested here. So much so that when I needed to get up to get a snack, I wouldn't put the book down. I would walk across my apartment with the book, never taking my eyes off the page. I needed to get my questions answered. And so naturally, yeah, I did. I read this one in 24 hours as well, which was wonderful because I am crawling my way out of that reading slump. But dare I say, reading slump no more. Thanks, Taylor. Was it a little cheesy? Maybe. Was it predictable? There was one twist that I predicted, but the rest I did not see coming. There are so many twists at the end. Jaw-dropping, what the fuck is happening moments. It was so vivid in my brain. You know, when reading doesn't feel like reading, this book did that. So definitely recommend this one if you are okay with a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of gore. And my final hack for breaking a reading slump is poetry. I love that all my hacks are just try this genre, but you really do need to find your own personal mood rhythm when it comes to reading. But with poetry, it's just so much less daunting to face so few words on a page. Also, collections of poems are broken up so nicely, so you can start and stop whatever you need, which makes the stress of picking up the book a little less so. One of the poetry collections that I read in January was Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky. This is a poetry collection that tells a linear story and it's broken up like acts of a play. It follows a city after a young deaf boy was shot down in the street, and this crime renders the entire city deaf. As unjustified horrors tear apart the small family of our protagonist, we realize that this trauma is unfolding across a nation. The ripple effect of infringement is unavoidable, but it also highlights the resilience of human beings as regular everyday life powers through the pain. I love when books do this, when we romanticize something as little as a kiss or cutting the hair of someone we love. We hone in on the power to create pockets of peace despite it all. I must confess though, I was not big-brained enough to appreciate this one as much as I could tell it deserved. I'm still making my way into the genre. It's all pretty new to me, unlocking this poetry part of my brain. So it's one thing to have the ability to read a poem about ducks, which, not to toot my own horn, I am very good at. But it's a complete other thing to dissect dense political metaphors. However, there were some simple lines that definitely got me. For example, I am mortal. I nap. Put that on a t-shirt, tattoo that on my body. I also love when books that feature sign language include illustrations of the signs on the pages. I just feel like it adds such an educational and immersive element that I love. Also, once again, much like The God of Small Things, just because a book requires you to put your thinking cap on a little bit doesn't make it unenjoyable. I feel like with poetry, the same can be said as what I typically say towards nonfiction. Pick up what you can, pocket what you love, and remember that there's no test afterwards. And so I quite enjoyed this collection despite the challenges that it had for me. If anything, I appreciate it more for waking me up and turning my brain on a little bit. And last but not least, the final book on this list and my favorite book of the stack was Devotions by Mary Oliver. You know we're going to be reading some of my favorite poems. I have to share them with you. Meditation, so I've heard, is best accomplished if you entertain a certain strict posture. Frankly, I prefer just to lounge under a tree, so why should I think I could ever be successful? Some days I fall asleep or land in that even better place, half asleep, where the world, spring, summer, autumn, winter, flies through my mind in its hearty ascent and its uncompromising descent. So I just lie like that while distance and time reveal their true attitudes. They never heard of me and never will or ever need to. Of course, I wake up finally thinking, how wonderful to be who I am. Made out of earth and water, my own thoughts, my own fingerprints, all that glorious temporary stuff. Now, Mary Oliver is easily the author that is recommended to me the most in my comment section when I A, ask for books that celebrate mundanity, and B, ask for poetry. And you know what? Y'all nailed it with this one because Oliver does both of those things beautifully. This collection is just shy of 450 pages and includes over 5 decades of Mary Oliver's work. This was the first collection of poems that I connected to this deeply. It took me to a very comfortable and slow part of my brain. It may be a reach, but hear me out. I would say that if you enjoyed the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, that you would also get a kick out of this one. Much like how John connects ordinary everyday appearances like geese to grander themes of life, Mary Oliver connects time to hermit crabs. And also, if you enjoyed Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, you will undoubtedly adore this one too. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, falls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. I've been asked a few times for my Spotify, which is something that I don't really hand out willy-nilly, and I hope that you can respect that boundary. But please allow me to recommend an album that not only I listen to all of the time, but I think perfectly pairs with this book. And it's called Cicada Waves by Ben Saraton. It's this luscious piano with outside bug sounds and bird songs, and it made reading this poetry collection even more ethereal. I didn't think that was even possible. This poetry collection feels like putting on warm socks fresh out of the dryer. It's sun shining through dewdrops on the tips of grass blades. It's seeing the same two ducks in love napping in a pond on your daily commute. If you're feeling a little chaotic, which 'tis this season, and you need to slow down, I recommend this book to you. For years, every morning I drank from Blackwater Pond. It was flavored with oak leaves and also, no doubt, the feet of ducks. And always it assuaged me from the dry bowl of the very far past. What I want to say is that the past is the past, and the present is what your life is, and you are capable of choosing what that will be, darling citizen. So come to the pond, or the river of your imagination, or the harbor of your longing, and put your lips to the world and live your life. And that's it. Those are the 12 books that I read in the month of January, featuring one book that I DNF'd. I would love to hear your reading wrap-ups in the comments down below. What have you read recently that you love? What do you hope to read in February? The works. Tell me it all. I wholeheartedly believe and will argue until the end of time that y'all influence me way more than I influence you. I love talking books with y'all. I love seeing what you're reading. This is my happy place. And thank you so much for joining me in this cozy corner of the internet. Thank you so much to everyone on patreon.com who make it possible for me to upload as frequently as I do. Y'all are the reason this channel is alive and thriving. Couldn't be more grateful. And as always, thank you for clicking, thank you for caring, and thank you for being nice. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!